everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Emily and today we're at the Creighton Business School with Professor Andy Gustafson, and today we're going to talk about business ethics in Iran. So you've been to Iran 4 times in the last 6 years. What draws you there?
The Iranians are actually really friendly people. Most of the Iranians love American culture. They invite you into their home, they feed you lots of food, they're very kind and generous, and I've made quite a few friends there, especially in academia, so I've been invited to different conferences there, and I'm going to get to go there again this May of 2010, so that'll be a lot of fun.
How is the business climate different in places like Iran?
Yeah, it's quite a bit different. I think in the United States you have a lot of consumer pressure because there's a lot of different companies. Like if you go to buy toothpaste, there's 75 different kinds of toothpaste, and so they've got to compete with each other somehow, right? And it's the same with companies like Home Depot and Menards and Lowe's all compete with each other, and Home Depot will say, we have we have lumber that's cut from new growth forests, not old growth. So they have to compete with each other. In Iran, in other countries like Iran, you might only have one competitor. So there's no competition. And so if a consumer says, we don't want to buy sugar from your company because you're unethical, they'll say, well, where else are you going to buy sugar? There's no place else to buy sugar. So you don't have competition on the one hand sometimes in these kind of consumer markets. But the other thing is you don't have a lot of transparency. Some people don't have a lot of access to internet. If there is internet access, companies don't necessarily tell you anything about themselves on the net because they don't need to. They have no incentive to do that. Here in the United States, one company might show off how good they are and all the ethical things they do, and so other companies say, oh, we better do that too to compete. But if none of the companies, if there's only one company to begin with, they don't need to compete with anyone, and so they don't need to give divulge any information about what they do. So in a lot of those kind of cultures, those countries that are developing still, there's not a lot of transparency, there's not a lot of competition, and so it's harder to have a lot of pressure for business ethics in those countries because of that.
So we have a perceived notion of what is ethically sound here in America, but what is the idea of ethics like in Iran?
I think in Iran and in a lot of other countries, they don't have nearly the sort of rules and regulations we do in our culture for business and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And so a lot of deals are done between friends, and maybe in the United States we'd think, oh, that's biased or unfair because you're only doing business with your family or with your friends. But in those cultures, that's what relationships are about. And so that's not necessarily seen to be bad. They wouldn't have rules against that necessarily. They don't have probably anti-monopolistic rules to keep one company from doing most of the business of a particular kind in their country. So there's a lot of rules like that they just wouldn't see that to be very important. I think part of that with countries like Iran is the economy just needs to develop more. The economy needs to develop, and then there'll be more competition, and then they need to have those rules in place. We see things like that even in China. They used to not be very concerned about copyright, but now a lot of Chinese companies are seeing that their stuff is getting ripped off by other Chinese firms. So now they want copyright rules. Yeah. So as an economy develops, a lot of times those regulations and rules and those ethical standards come into place after the fact. But when there's not as much competition, there's not as much need, some people would think. Whatever we can get going is good. We don't want to worry about the ethical component yet until the economy gets going. That's how they think about it, I think, a lot of times.
Okay. You talked a little bit about how Iranians like American culture. Can you talk about how you've seen that demonstrated over there?
Well, they watch a lot of, the young people, there's half the people in Iran are under 30. And they watch a ton of American movies. One time I was walking in sort of the bazaar, the old market, down underground, and I was walking, there's these ladies who are wearing the scarf or the head covering and all of that. And then there's this guy who walked towards me. He's dressed up like Ali G, with a gold Adidas jumpsuit on and the skull cap and red glasses and the chains. And he said, "Hey man!" And I said, "Hi." And I tried to talk to him, and he didn't know any more English. He just smiled. But he'd sort of absorbed Ali G's image, but he didn't know anything really else about America. He couldn't speak English, and he couldn't go any further than that. So I think they try to do what they can to absorb American culture sometimes, but it's not always a real developed understanding of American culture. So, and we see those movies. They sometimes have movies that are for sale as DVDs before they even come out in our movie theaters. So I don't know how they get them, but they have those movies around. So it's pretty interesting.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks everyone for watching today, and remember, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to visit us on Facebook, stop by our blog, or follow us on Twitter. Thanks for watching.